My name is Kaylin Seha. I'm Learning Skills Specialist at Charles Drew University. So I work primarily with the CDU UCLA Medical Education Program, which is our medical education program. I also work with our postbacks as well as our residents. So kind of the full spectrum of medical education. I said primarily with the medical students though. So as far as how would you define having good time management? I just want you to kind of, and I see we have a couple people who joined. So if you just want to take a second to think about like, what would you define good time management as being? Like, what are the things that a person would have or be doing if they had good time management skills?
Sorry, do I like, should I
Yeah,
answer
go for it.
that? I think having good time management is like having some sort of schedule that you can kind of have an idea of how your like day is, kind of having like a balance between like, um, doing activities like that are related to like your wellness and like your mental health, but also like, finding the time to study and also like just having a overall good balance to your day, having enough time to sleep, things like that. I think that's what I would define as like good time management.
And I see we have Emily joined us.
Hi, I'm so
Hello.
sorry.
You're fine.
Sorry
You're
for joining
good.
late.
No, no worries. Did you want to add anything as far, not to just put you on the spot when you just came in, but as far as how you would define having good time management?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with a lot of what Crystal said. I think for me, I know that I am managing my time well when I kind of am able to complete all of the tasks that I set out to do. Um, and it's like reasonable, realistic goals. So yeah.
In all important aspects, you know. So been kind of just going on. So this is just a rough breakdown of where your time kind of goes in the course of a week. So we all start out with the same, 168 hours in a week. It doesn't sometimes feel like that, sometimes more, sometimes less, but that's what's in a week. So that's 7 hours of sleep per night. People always kind of, hee hee at it. But, it's kind of one of the things where I think we tend to pull from first, when we're running short on time is sleep, but as far as just thinking about overall learning and, you know, work-life balance and school-life balance, sleep is definitely important. And not to say that there aren't going to be, especially, when you get into third year and above, where you're in the clinical setting, sometimes the 7 hours is not happening, and that's definitely reality. But as far as those times when you are able to get adequate sleep, you definitely want to make sure you're building that into your day. And then as far as learning activities, so again, it kind of averages 30 hours per week. And so for studying, you want to be aiming for equal amounts of time, and I kind of compare when you're in the clerkships to almost like working full time and going to school. So some people have had that experience where they had to balance kind of working all day and then coming home and studying, where other people have not. So I think it definitely is a transition though from the preclinical years. And Emily, I'm not sure what year you are, or if you're in medical school yet or prior, but
Yeah, I'm in MS1, so
just
very much
starting.
new to the scene.
Well, it's a very different, thing, but I think for both preclinical and clinical, you have limited time to study. Whether it's because you're in class, whether it's because you're on wards, you have limited times to study and kind of a larger amount of information than you're used to having to deal with. So like by the time you get to third year, maybe you're kind of used to the volume, but now the time you have available has changed. In first year, it's like maybe I'm not used to this volume yet. I'm used to more like having days off in between. I'm not used to having kind of material coming at me every day. So I think for both of you, it's kind of a similar thing of finding those available times that you're going to have to study. And I will say right now that I'm really bad at like sticking to the PowerPoint. So I try, but many of the things I'm saying are probably on later slides. And again, you have the slides. So Emily, I don't know if you can see in the chat, but if not, just remind me before the end to repost the link. I have a link where you can download this PowerPoint as well as just some additional handouts that might be helpful. But I think with good time management, it's having, somebody's that like a realistic schedule, so I think sometimes it helps if it's something where it's an area where you need to kind of have some growth. I think it's helpful sometimes to lay out your week, and kind of start with those things that are immovable, whether it's class time, whether it's time you have to be in the clinic, whether it's time, like mandatory activities. You always want to start with those first because you cannot move them. Like there's no flexibility in them. But then like even looking at this list of some of these things of where does your time go, travel time is sometimes something that people don't account for when you're thinking about a schedule, as far as getting to class, getting to lab, if you're doing things virtually, obviously that's a little bit different as far as travel time, but there's still, you want to account for that. And when I work with students, I've been working in my current position close to 10 years. And before that, I was working in private practice, educational therapy for about 10 years also. So I've seen lots and lots of students who, trying to build out schedules. And these are some of the main things I see when people have schedules that just aren't working for them. Is one of them is that people aren't accounting for all the things they actually need to do. So like a lot of things on like eating, and we don't always think about that as something that you have to kind of account for time-wise. But even like going to the store, if you're making food, whether you're buying food, that takes time and you want to allocate time for it. And it's when you don't allocate time for some of these things that a schedule starts to kind of fall apart or go sideways, because it's like, well, now I'm behind and like, I don't understand why I'm behind. Even like errands, it's like filling out forms, answering emails, paying bills, kind of these day-to-day tasks that we have to do. You want to leave time for that, and it shouldn't be a matter of like, okay, every time an email comes in, I'm going to answer it, because like that's not realistic that you're always going to answer it. Sometimes you can immediately, dispose of it or just a quick response, but you definitely want to allocate time in your day to make sure you're checking on that. And really that's like a daily thing that you have to make sure you're staying up with emails, because then again, it's very easy for tasks to kind of fall through the cracks if you're not personal care, showering, taking care of yourself. That's something, again, and it's not to say don't do it, but then it's a matter of making sure you're accounting time for it. And I think sometimes, so again, depending kind of where you are in terms of creating schedules, for some people, they're really good at making schedules and not great at following them. So one thing that can be helpful if that's you is so one of the handouts in that Google Drive, it's like a 2-column schedule. So there's one column for you to put what you plan to do, and then kind of as you go through the week, like what did you actually do, and kind of see how accurate you were. And sometimes there's people's time frames are off. Like I thought it was going to take me 30 minutes, it took me 2 hours. Now if it's really taking 2 hours, that's fine, but then you want to make sure you're leaving 2 hours for it to take. You don't want to take a 2-hour task and give it 30 minutes. Now, sometimes there's different things you could be doing to kind of improve the efficiency of what you're doing, and it really shouldn't be taking 2 hours. So it could be either of those things. And I will say with study time a lot, sometimes tasks take as long as we give them to take. So it's like, okay, if I have 3 hours set aside for studying and you're not really specific and intentional with kind of what you're planning to do in those 3 hours, it's very easy for those 3 hours to go by and you haven't accomplished really a lot. So it's like, oh, I'm going to study. And like I sit down and I open the book, or I'm watching the video, or like I open up UWorld, and it's like, I didn't really have a plan for those 3 hours though. So then it's kind of hard to know when you're done, because it's just like, okay, well, I studied for 3 hours, but I don't feel like I know this any better. So when you put, one, you want to have those times built into your schedule for studying, and it might be, so you kind of, and it might vary week to week, more so in third year. It might be that it's not the same time every day. It might be that, okay, like I know I'm going to have more time open on Thursday, or I have more time open on a certain day of the week. And then it, you want to plan your schedule around that. Like, what are the tasks where I'm going to need those bigger chunks of time? What are things I can maybe do in a smaller period of time? With our third years, I always tell them, try to find at least half an hour. So no matter what you're doing, and it might be like a half hour that comes up in 3 10-minute blocks, throughout the day. but you can easily like pull out, like I did, 5 questions, in that time frame. So when you have those down times, you want to be able to make use of them, but then also you want to really be finding that study time on a regular basis. I won't say 7 days a week daily, but you definitely want to not be, so this is more so for Emily, you don't want to get to the end of the week and it's like, I haven't looked at anything all week. Now here's the first time I'm reviewing it. I mean, really it's true for everybody, but I said third year is just kind of a little bit different because the times I think are a little bit more sporadic as far as when you're able to study in the first 2 years, you kind of have a little more control over where you're putting your study times. But as far as kind of structuring your time for the week, so before a class, or this would really be kind of even before like a study session, it's like, what do you need to do to prepare? And like, how is the preparation going to save you or lose you time? If it's lecture, are you previewing ahead? Are you looking at materials ahead of time? So when you go into that lecture, I have some semblance of what they're going to talk about. If it's studying in third year, it's kind of, okay, like, is this a topic that I'm familiar with? Have I seen patients on this? Or is this something where, no, I'm starting from scratch? So then how am I going to approach that in a different way? I think for a lot of students, it's like, well, I'm just going to do questions, and there's nothing wrong with doing questions or Anki cards. But if you don't have kind of the knowledge behind it, a lot of times those questions and those cards will be reflective of the fact that you don't know it still. And people, I learned by questions and I learned by the cards, but then you want to make sure you're like, how are you going to learn from it? And if you kind of just continue to get things wrong, it's like, okay, when am I going to stop? And, whether it's reviewing content, when do I take that step back and making sure you're kind of monitoring that? I think for a lot of times people are really busy, but they're not always productive. And it's not that, it's rare I come across a student who's not studying, like, and they're just not studying enough. People are putting in the time, but then it's just, you put in the time and you're not getting anything to show for it. Like, I spent 2 hours, studying, and then I still don't know it any better. And so it's kind of like, you have to figure out what that. So sometimes it's finding the 2 hours, right? And that's where that time management piece comes in. And like, am I giving myself enough time to study? But for most people, they do have enough time to study. It's just, okay, what am I doing with that time? So really having a good plan, like I said, daily, weekly, it says throughout the blog here, because this is from another presentation, but basically through the course, it's kind of, what are my goals as far as where do I want to be, by the midpoint? Where do I want to be 2 weeks out from my test? Where do I want to be a week out from my test? And not to say there's not new content coming throughout, but even thinking about, like, when do I start studying back those things I learned earlier, and fitting that into your schedule. Because again, it's not that you can only focus on the day or the week at hand. So I think kind of the more intentional you can be with creating a schedule as far as what I'm going to do each day. Like, I'm going to review the lectures from Monday. I'm going to review COPD. Like, you don't want to just be like, I'm going to study, because again, studying can be anything and can take forever. And you want to have like a very specific set of tasks you're going to get done in a study session, in a day, in a week. Now, for some people, it's helpful to kind of list it all out at the beginning of the week and then find places for all those things to go. Like, here's all the things I want to accomplish, and now here's my open blocks of time, and where am I going to put them? So that way, kind of when you get to the end of a day and you are done, like, you can give yourself permission to be done, versus like, well, no, let me just like push it, 5 more questions. Let me push it, a little bit more, because that's when it starts getting, I think, into unproductive study time, so then you're spending the time doing it, but then you're not getting kind of the benefit from it. And then it becomes frustrating. So it's like, well, now I'm not sleeping. Now I'm, giving up time to do some of these other things because I'm studying so much, but like, I still don't feel like I know it any better. So any questions about any of that? No. Okay. So this is just why that's important. So as far as when we take in new information, so basically within a day, if you have not looked at it again in some way or form, most of it will be gone. Even after 20 minutes, it starts going. But as far as building a study schedule, that's why like doing it regularly, and I'm not saying you can't have an off day in the week, but you really want to try to have daily study time. So like whether it's, after lecture, I'm building in time to review that lecture, I'm building in time, just like I said, even if it's a half-hour day in the clinic setting, you want to be looking at things regularly, because if you get kind of a week removed from it before you look at it again, you're basically going to be starting over with it. And then again, it takes longer because it's like now I'm having to basically relearn it. Like it's not really reviewing it at that point. It's almost like starting over, and you don't have time to do things twice or to do things 3 times. And, even if you spend like a half-hour a day looking at something versus like I wait 5 days and then I look at it for 2 hours, like the person who spent the half-hour day is probably going to be further along with it because they had kind of more repetition with it. They saw it more frequently than the person who waited till the end of the week. And then it's like they had to start over and have this massive dump of information 5 days later. So the more you can build it in, and again, it's not that if it's something you have not been doing, you can necessarily jump from 0 to 100, but just the more you kind of like, okay, like where do I have times that I could build in study time if you're not already doing it on a daily basis. And so this is kind of just showing why that's important in reverse. So as far as, every time you review it, then it kind of slows down that curve of forgetting or losing that information. And so then just some different factors, and I feel like I've touched on all of these because like I said, I'm bad at following the slides in order, but and I put COVID-19 on here because I think, there's times where we cannot do it, and I think you have to give yourself that permission sometimes to just, like, it's okay to stop. There's times where we can push through and there's times where we cannot push through, and it's not helpful for your mental well-being, but even study-wise, to really be kind of, having a 13-hour study day when you're not really getting anything out of those 13 hours. So that's just a side note. But then physical organization, so kind of how you have your materials organized is another place where you can easily gain or lose time. I'm someone who's very guilty of saving like everything to the desktop. And it's like, okay, now like let me find it. Like even when I was putting together this presentation to find those documents, it's like I had to search for them, and the kind of, if you have your stuff in an organized way, so when you do go to sit down and study or review, it's not a matter of like, let me find that PowerPoint now, or let me go download it now. Again, it adds up. Like it doesn't seem like a lot of time, but like if for every lecture you spend an extra, let's say 5 minutes, just finding stuff, like that can easily be a couple hours by the end of the week if you're doing that every single time. So it doesn't just mean physical, like I said, it can be electronic organization too. And there's lots of different, management systems as far as having materials online that can be helpful, like OneDrive and OneNote. And, so if you're not using some of these things, it's always, I think, good to try them out, and see if it's something that can be helpful. And then like when you're getting ready to like review for a final exam, you kind of have it all together also versus like notes all over the place in various places. And then as far as prioritization of tasks. So again, there's a million things you could be doing in terms of studying. So it's like what needs to actually happen. And like what are those things that for sure by the end of the week or by the end of this course that I want to get done. And then what are the things, okay, if I had time, it would be nice to do them. But what I see a lot is when people just have kind of a list of 20 things they're planning to get done in the day, and nobody was going to get 20 things done in the day. So that's down at the bottom, that rule of 5. So, you don't want to have more than kind of like 5 things. And so for some people, it's easier to kind of at the beginning of the week to list out all the things you want to get done in the week and then find places for all those things. For other people, it's more kind of just on a daily basis. It's like, okay, today, these are the things I want to get done. But you want it to be a realistic schedule in terms of tasks. You want it to be realistic in terms of the time frames you're giving yourselves to complete those tasks. And so,
sorry, I actually had a quick question. So like I'm currently also studying for step 2 because I'm at the end of like my 3rd year. Technically, I have a few more rotations. So for like step 2, like I'm trying to use Cram Fighter, but like it's very overwhelming. Like, so how do I like change my schedule? Because like Cram Fighter is like, it tells you like what things to get done, but then like sometimes it'll have like 20,000 things to get like done in a day. So I was like wondering like how would you like then kind of would you eliminate some resources to kind of like make it easier to tackle the day that cram fighter assigns certain things to you? Like, how do you tackle that?
And I know because like, and I'm not as familiar with that interface, but I know like osmosis has a similar function, you know. So I know with that one you were able to actually like modify stuff within it. I don't know if it works the same for cram fighters, so I don't know kind of how many resources you're using, but
Allows you to like select whatever resources you're using, but like I don't know how many to like really use for step 2. So like what are the recommendations you give to like your students in terms of like tackling like step exams, I guess?
I mean, I think, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I don't really know like how many resources I should have, and there's like so many resources in the world you can use, but like I don't know what are the big ones to use for step 2.
I was gonna say it's usually not that people have too few resources. It's
Yeah, it's
many at all levels. You know, our first years are really all about Anki this year, and having fits about, you know, not being able to do it on a daily basis. But like 3 years ago, no one was doing Anki, so you know, things kind of come and go. But
yeah. When I was a first year,
step 2, I don't know that there's like a like for step 1, like kind of everyone uses first aid, everyone uses pathoma. I don't know that there's that consistent of a thing for step 2 in the same way. I'd say most people have like a primary question bank they're using, you know, for most of U World, if not one of the other ones, kind of a primary like review source, you know, whether it's master the board, like something where it's comprehensive. It could be online med ed, people are using like Amboss. You know, I would pick one to kind of be your primary source, especially if you're trying to study during third year still with it. Just because, and again, it's not that those other things aren't helpful, but they're all kind of variations of the same thing. And more so for step 2, like no resource is going to have everything. Right? There's just too many variations and questions because it's more focused on management. So you want one that's going to, I guess, address the needs that you have. For some people, they have some foundational science things that are missing, you know, so some resources might be better suited than others. You know, for, I'll say a lot of people, it's more the management side, kind of that next best step type of question. And again, no resource is going to have it laid out like that. But like some people prefer the ones that are laid out like case files and things like that, you know, where it has kind of that walking through the steps of management. And then like as a third resource, some sort of like drill type review things, whether it's like step 2 secrets, whether it's flashcards, whether it's Anki, you know, but I would try to limit it to like one of each of those things. So I don't know how many you have listed in your fighter right now, but
I currently have like UWorld listed. I included online med-ed and the master the boards, but I'm guessing like from your suggestion to just pick one of those to kind of help with that.
It's not that like you have to throw it away, you know, like it doesn't make sense in one, you still have it to reference, but as far as trying to get through them in their entirety, I would not probably try to be doing both of those.
Okay. And and then I my fourth resource that I would technically have is the Anki cards.
So yeah, I would remove one of those.
One of those. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to be realistic with like
yeah. You can put that for future reference.
Yes. Yeah, true. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that just because I'm like towards the end of third year. So like
I understand.
Things for me to tackle. Thanks.
I'm sorry, I actually also had like just building off of the Anki part, since I feel like I'm trying to get into it, but it's just very much like new to me. And so I guess I'm curious in terms of like the like rule of 5 thing that you're talking about. I guess my first question was just clarifying, is that kind of like having just like 5 main goals like on like a daily basis? Okay, great. And then I guess the follow-up question is then I guess for like blocks, just I know Anki is something I'm trying to like implement, but in terms of like other big things, I don't really know, I guess, the best way to structure things, and that like I'm not giving myself like unlimited time and kind of not really completing a goal. And like for Anki, I don't know if like that just means getting 100 cards done or like getting 50 cards done. or like kind of just like reviewing lecture notes and doing more like practice problems? I guess I'm just like curious what your general like, advice is for like students in like the
So I
preclinical.
think it depends on what it is. It's a little bit different preclinical, right? Because it's very bound to the lectures and kind of that information. So it's something that's what I call endless, like Anki. You can almost have it be a more time-bound activity, versus 100 cards. It's like I'm going to spend an hour. I'm going to spend 30 minutes. I'm going to spend whatever time, because I think sometimes when the focus is on like the number of questions or cards, sometimes you need to spend more time because you don't know it that well. But then it's like, then it takes 4 hours, because you said I'm going to do 100, or the other way around. It's like I'm rushing because I set this goal for this number and like I'm not really getting the full benefit out of it. So for those sorts of things, especially Anki more so, I think it's helpful to have it be a time bound activity versus kind of a quantity bound activity. As far as like, reviewing like lecture material and things like that, kind of you want to see how long it typically takes you. I mean, you don't want it to take too much longer than it actually was. So if it's like an hour-long lecture, you want to be spending probably an hour, hour and a half reviewing it. If you're spending 4 hours reviewing an hour-long lecture, like there's probably something you could be doing differently to review that. And if I talked in the first session about like if you sit through the hour-long lecture and then if you don't look at it again till Friday, and then it's like, okay, now I'm just watching it again on Saturday. That's not really reviewing it either. Kind of like you're starting at square one. So I mean, I think for like when it's reviewing a specific piece of information or specific topic, it's more just you want to keep an eye on the time frame, make sure it's being something that's feasible, but also make sure you're giving yourself a realistic amount. Sometimes I know I have students where it's like, well, someone else only took 30 minutes to review it, and that's taking me an hour. So how can I do it in 30 minutes? And some people are never going to do it in 30 minutes. And it's not that they're doing anything wrong. People just have different levels of familiarity sometimes, or kind of just for whatever reason. But again, if it's taking you like 4 times as long as what the actual event was, there's probably something you could be doing differently. So I mean, kind of just, I said, general rule of thumb, like equal amounts of time, like an hour lecture. And it might not be like a 3-hour lab takes you 3 hours to review. So I mean, that might be less on that end, but kind of just like I said, as a general guideline as far as building out a study schedule.
Thank you so much.
Of course. And so then, because I think we're actually coming up on the end of our time, but I'll finish this one and then, yeah, I got through about the same amount of slides this time as last time, but I want your questions to be answered. So, and I prefer kind of a back and forth versus talking at people anyway. So you have the slides though. So like I said, if you look through, you can definitely feel free to reach out if there's things you want to talk through further. But so kind of that uninterrupted blocks versus smaller chunks of time. So again, when you're kind of looking at the times you have free in a week, be thinking about what are those tasks that can be done in small amounts of time, so you're able to utilize them well, versus like, what do I need to save for, maybe there are things like I want to save for the weekend, or when I have kind of 4 hours, like maybe I want to kind of consolidate all my notes from the week. Maybe I want to do a set of 40 questions where it's going to just take me longer and it's not something I want to break up. So kind of thinking about what tasks go in which places, I think sometimes is important also. And then so process over product. So this is where people take like a really long time to create these really beautiful outlines and charts and tables, or whether you're creating your own cards, and then it's like you never have time to actually look back at it because you've spent so long creating it. Now, you definitely get some benefit out of creating things, but again, you want to make sure that if you're spending an hour and a half reviewing, like 45 minutes of it was not formatting, the table. And I've seen people do it, and I don't think they're consciously doing it, but I've seen people where it gets like it has to look right, and if that's you, it might be, okay, I'm going to use some pre-made notes, or like I'm going to use some kind of resources where it's already created, so you're not kind of putting yourself in that boat. And then either you can kind of just duplicate it if you want to put it into your own format, or you can kind of just annotate some of those things. But again, you don't want to spend so long making any study product that you never have time to look back. And I see that happen for a lot of people where they spend so long like writing out the notes that they never get to look back at the notes. So I mean, just make sure you're not spending your time, and I'm not saying like don't spend any time and like scribble, but you want it to be something where you look back and it's something that's helpful and a useful document still, but kind of make sure you are balancing that right. And so rule 5, I kind of already touched on, where really realistically 5 things in a day. And it's not like, oh, like each one takes 10 minutes, right? Like some of these things might be 2 hours, it might be 3 hours, but for most people, for most things, like that's a good guideline. Like if you're getting into, I have 20 tasks, I have 30 tasks, like it's just probably not going to happen. And then again, it's like, well, what am I doing wrong that I couldn't do these 30 things when like you were never going to do the 30 things? So I think we kind of touched on this, paper versus electronic. And so again, it does not have to be a minute-to-minute schedule to be an effective schedule. I've seen lots of students where it was literally a list, and they kind of said these things were going to happen in the morning, these things are going to happen in the afternoon. That's all they needed. Some people need more structure than that. With the electronic, you have kind of some of the benefits of like the reminders and things like that. I tend to be like a more paper or pencil person myself. I've had to kind of really transition to electronic just because it's too easy to forget to transfer something over into the paper schedule. And it's just easier for me and for many people to kind of just have electronics. A lot of times if you're getting, invites or notices from emails, it's like really easy for it to just create it to your calendar. And again, it's just saving you time by doing that. Again, some people need kind of that hour by hour schedule. So you kind of have to find what's going to be comfortable for you, what's going to be helpful for you. For some people, it helps to, take that hour at the beginning of the week, really figure out what your week's going to look like, and then I don't think about it again. Other people, it's more on a daily basis. They're trying to, okay, what am I going to be doing tomorrow? And it's not that one's right and one's wrong. It's going to be what's going to be most helpful for you. And I think, yeah, that was the end of at least time management. So, like I said, you have, I'm going to stop sharing real quick just so I can put the link one more time, because I think we had some people join after I put it. So that link, so you'll be able to download the whole presentation, as well as just like one's a blank schedule if you want to kind of use, and not that you have to use that format, but to kind of just help you start thinking about it. One's like a test analysis worksheet, one's an activity that we didn't get to in either group. But I'm happy to answer any other questions that you guys might have before we end. My email's in that PowerPoint. So like I said, definitely do not hesitate to reach out. I love to talk to folks, and I always say, like, even if you're not a student, like once I know you, like now I know you, and now I know all of you. So definitely don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to, there's no question too big, too small, too silly, too anything. We're trying to make doctors, and that's it. And so if there's any way I can be helpful to you now in the future, definitely don't hesitate. Unless I'm happy to hang out and answer any further questions you guys might have.